My neighbor stood on my porch, screaming at the top of her lungs, pointing a trembling finger at my face, while two police officers looked at me like I was an unstable threat to the community. She had spent 6 months convincing the entire neighborhood that I was losing my mind, claiming I was stalking her, slashing her tires, and leaving unsettling packages on her doorstep. The community ostracized me, my landlord threatened eviction, and even the local police warned me that I was one step away from a criminal record. Everyone thought I was a dangerous, unhinged lunatic. But what my neighbor didn't realize was that I had spent the last 3 weeks turning my entire house into a digital fortress. I didn't shout back, and I didn't try to defend myself. Instead, I quietly pulled out my phone, cast a live feed to the smart TV visible through my window, and hit play on the security footage. Within 60 seconds, the screaming stopped. Her face turned entirely bloodless, and the police officers slowly reached for their handcuffs. Follow my story until the end to see the ultimate legal reckoning, and comment below with the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story has reached. My name is Chloe Bennett. I am 27 years old, and for the past 5 years, I have poured every single ounce of my energy into building my business as a freelance graphic designer. I lived in a cramped, noisy downtown apartment, sacrificing vacations, dining out, and basic luxuries just to watch my savings account slowly grow. My ultimate dream was simple: to own a home of my own, a peaceful sanctuary where I could sit by a window, look out at a garden, and design my clients' projects in absolute serenity. When I finally signed the closing papers on a charming, mid-century bungalow nestled on Oak Ridge Lane in the affluent suburb of Willow Creek, I genuinely felt like all my grueling hours of hard work had finally paid off. The house needed some love, but it possessed beautiful historic bones, an expansive front yard, and an incredible heirloom rose garden that had been planted decades ago. For the first 48 hours, the neighborhood felt exactly like the paradise I had dreamed about. But that illusion shattered on my third morning. I was out on the front lawn, gently pruning a magnificent, blooming red rose bush, when a shadow suddenly fell across the grass. I looked up to see a woman marching toward me with an icy, military posture. She was dressed in an impeccably tailored cream blazer, wearing large designer sunglasses that she slowly slid down the bridge of her nose. This was Evelyn Vance, the undisputed matriarch of the local homeowners association. Without offering a handshake, a smile, or even a basic welcome to the neighborhood, she let out a sharp, patronizing sigh. Her eyes swept over my paint-stained overalls and my youthful face with profound, unmistakable disgust. "So, you're the one who bought this lot," Evelyn said, her voice dripping with synthetic politeness. I must confess, we were all expecting a traditional family to move in, not someone quite so. A graphic designer, correct? I suppose that explains why the property is already starting to look a bit unkempt. Around here, we maintain strict standards to protect our property values. Those heirloom roses, for instance, are completely out of alignment with the sleek, modern boxwood hedges I've cultivated next door. I strongly suggest you dig them out and replace them immediately. I stood there, completely stunned by her sheer arrogance. I politely informed her that I loved the roses and had no intention of destroying them. Evelyn's eyes narrowed into tiny, dangerous slits. I thought it was just an overbearing neighbor being particular. I had no idea it was the opening volley of calculated war. The escalating tension became local reality just 3 days later. I woke up early, stepped out onto my front porch with a mug of warm coffee, and immediately froze in absolute horror. The beautiful, blooming heirloom rose bushes that line my front walkway, the ones I'd spent the last week carefully pruning and watering, had been completely destroyed overnight. Someone had walked onto my property under the cover of total darkness, aggressively ripped them out by the roots, and scattered the broken, trampled stems across the grass. Tears filled my eyes as I stared at the mindless destruction of my favorite part of the house. I knew instantly who was responsible. Trying to keep my composure, I marched over to Evelyn's property line and knocked firmly on her heavy oak front door. When she finally opened it, looking utterly immaculate in a silk robe, I politely asked if she had happened to see anyone lurking near my lawn last night. Evelyn didn't even allow me to finish my sentence. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated coldness. "I certainly don't monitor the dramatic antics of your cheap house, Chloe," she sneered. Before I could say another word, she violently slammed the door directly in my face, the heavy wood echoing across the quiet street. I walked back to my porch, stunned by her hostile reaction, but the true nightmare began the very next morning. At exactly 9 a.m., a bright yellow municipal vehicle pulled into my circular driveway. Two local code enforcement officers stepped out, holding official clipboards and severe expressions. My heart dropped as they approached my front door. The lead inspector informed me that the city had received an urgent, anonymous hotline complaint alleging that I was actively operating an illegal, noisy commercial printing business right out of my residential garage, causing a severe disturbance to the peace. I was completely dumbfounded. I led the officers inside my tidy, quiet garage to show them the absolute absurdity of the accusation. The only equipment I owned was a standard desktop computer, a small iPad, and my design tablets. The inspectors walked around the space, took several notes, and found absolutely nothing that violated a single city code or neighborhood ordinance. They apologized for the massive inconvenience, packed up their tools, and prepared to leave. But as the city truck slowly drove away from the curb, I looked up toward the second-story window of the massive house next door. Evelyn was standing right behind her pristine lace curtains, a glass of white wine in her hand and a chilling smile on her face. The city code inspectors had left, but Evelyn's malicious campaign was only shifting into a much more insidious gear. Over the next week, the baseline atmosphere on Oak Ridge Lane transformed from quietly tense to aggressively hostile. The grand manifestation of my psychological eviction arrived when Evelyn decided to host an elaborate, fully catered summer block party right in her massive front driveway. Strings of outdoor cafe lights hung between the trees, uproarious laughter echoed down the street, and the rich scent of barbecued steak filled the air. Every single resident on our cul-de-sac received a formal, handwritten invitation tucked neatly into their mailboxes. Everyone except me. I sat quietly in my desk by the front window, trying to focus on a branding deadline for a client, while the entire neighborhood gathered just 50 feet away. Evelyn, wearing a vibrant sundress and floating around the party like a seasoned politician, spent the entire evening holding a wine glass and holding court near the fence line. It didn't take long for me to realize exactly what she was doing. She was systematically weaponizing her deep social influence to spread horrific, completely fabricated rumors about me to anyone who would listen. Through the open window, I could catch fractured snippets of her theatrical, hushed whispers. She was telling the local parents that I was deeply unstable, prone to random aggressive outbursts, and that she had caught me actively stalking her property lines at night. The social damage was instantaneous and total. The very next afternoon, I walked down my front steps to pick up the morning paper just as a young mother from across the street was walking her golden retriever. When I raised my hand and offered a warm, genuine smile, she suddenly gasped, tightly pulled her dog's leash toward her body, and aggressively crossed to the far side of the asphalt just to avoid passing near my lawn. It was as if I carried a contagious disease. Old couples who had previously waved when driving by now stared straight ahead, their jaws set in harsh judgment. Evelyn had successfully constructed a unified front against me without a single person ever coming to ask for my side of the story. The absolute silence on Oak Ridge Lane became completely deafening. I went from being a welcome, excited newcomer to the ultimate neighborhood pariah in less than 3 weeks. The social isolation was deep and suffocating, but Evelyn had no intention of slowing down her psychological assault. She wanted me entirely gone from Oak Ridge Lane, and she was willing to orchestrate an absolute disaster to achieve it. The terrifying climax of her initial campaign struck on a Tuesday night. I had gone to bed early, completely exhausted from a long day of intense design work. But at exactly 2 a.m., the peaceful silence of my home was shattered by a sharp, echoing crash. SFX, loud glass shattering violently in darkness. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering wildly against my ribs. It sounded like someone had forcefully thrown a rock right through my downstairs windows. Before I could even throw off my blankets and grab my phone, a sudden flash of intense light illuminated my bedroom walls. I crept toward the window and looked down into my circular driveway. 2 local police cruisers had pulled up on my lawn, their emergency red and blue lights spinning rapidly, casting a frantic glare across the front of my bungalow. SFX, distant police sirens fading out, heavy footsteps on a wooden porch. Trembling with anxiety, I hurried down the stairs as a sequence of heavy, authoritative knocks rattled my front door. I unlocked it to find 2 uniformed patrol officers standing there, their hands resting cautiously on their utility belts. They didn't look at me with sympathy. Their expressions were hard, suspicious, and deeply judgmental. Before I could even ask what was wrong, the lead officer demanded to know why I was causing a public disturbance. It turned out Evelyn had made a frantic, breathless call to 911 just 10 minutes prior. She had reported to the city dispatcher that I was currently having a severe, aggressive psychological breakdown, screaming profanities into the night and violently hurling heavy glass bottles directly onto her pristine property. I stood there in my pajamas, completely dumbfounded, softly explaining that I had been fast asleep until the sound of glass broke outside. As I looked past the officer's shoulders, I saw Evelyn standing proudly on her elevated wooden deck. She was pointing a dramatic, trembling finger at me, calling me a crazy, unstable lunatic loud enough for the gathering neighbors to hear. I stood in my pajamas on my own porch, explaining to suspicious officers that I had been fast asleep, while Evelyn stood on her deck, calling me crazy for everyone to hear. The midnight police visit left me completely shaken, but the psychological warfare was about to intensify in a highly official capacity. Evelyn possessed deep roots within the community, and she wasted no time weaponizing the institutional power of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association against me. Just 2 days after the midnight incident, a crisp white envelope arrived in my mailbox via certified mail. Breaking the seal with trembling fingers, my heart completely dropped. It was a formal notification from the HOA board, issuing me a massive, unpayable $2,500 fine for chronic noise violations, environmental disturbance, and causing a severe psychological threat to surrounding neighbors. The document explicitly stated that if the fine wasn't settled immediately, they would place a formal lien against my home. I knew I couldn't let this slide in silence. The following evening, I gathered my courage and attended the monthly HOA meeting at the local community center, determined to look my accusers in the eye and defend my sanity. But the moment I stepped into the brightly lit room, I realized the entire event was a meticulously staged trap. Evelyn sat comfortably near the front row, flanked by her tight social circle. When my name was finally called to address the board, I stood up and attempted to present my case calmly. Before I could even complete a single sentence, a heavy-set man named Marcus, Evelyn's most loyal lieutenant, abruptly slammed his hand on the table and stood up. "We have all heard enough of your delusions, Chloe," Marcus shouted, his voice echoing aggressively across the room. "You are an unstable, unhinged element on Oak Ridge Lane, and your erratic presence is single-handedly tanking our suburban property values." The rest of the board members nodded in unified, clinical agreement, completely denying me my legal right to speak or present any form of defense. I left the meeting in total humiliation, feeling utterly crushed. The next morning, I called my legal counsel to explain the compounding disaster. My lawyer sighed heavily over the line, his voice dripping with pure exhaustion. He begged me in the strongest possible terms to just cut my losses, list the bungalow for sale, and flee Willow Creek entirely. He assured me that trying to fight a deeply entrenched, affluent suburban elite would completely bankrupt me long before I could ever hope to secure a victory in court. That's when a cold, dark clarity suddenly settled over me. I looked out the window at Evelyn's pristine estate, my sadness completely evaporating into a hard, calculated focus. My lawyer begged me to sell the house. He said fighting an entrenched suburban elite would bankrupt me before I could ever win. That's when I decided to stop fighting by their rules. To beat a predator like Evelyn Vance, I had to completely alter my behavior and stop reacting with obvious emotion. Over the next 10 days, I purposefully adopted the persona of a thoroughly broken, utterly defeated woman. I kept my heavy front blinds tightly closed at all hours, turned off my exterior porch lights, and deliberately allowed my front lawn to become slightly overgrown and unkempt. I wanted Evelyn to confidently believe that her severe institutional fines and aggressive psychological warfare had completely shattered my spirit. From behind her pristine windows, she undoubtedly celebrated her apparent victory, watching the silent bungalow with a smug, untouchable satisfaction. But behind those closed blinds, I wasn't weeping or packing my bags. I was meticulously engineering a highly sophisticated, invisible trap. The turning point arrived under the protective cover of a heavily overcast, pitch-black Thursday night. While a light, steady rain pattered against the pavement, completely clearing the suburban street of any wandering onlookers, I quietly put my strategic plan into active motion. Dressed in a dark, oversized hoodie, I moved silently around the perimeter of my mid-century bungalow like a shadow. Over the next 3 hours, I carefully installed 6 premium, commercial-grade hidden security cameras that boasted crystal-clear 4K resolution and advanced night vision capabilities. I didn't place them in obvious, visible locations where Evelyn's legal team could complain about an invasion of privacy. Instead, I cleverly integrated them into the existing structure of my property. One tiny black lens was deeply embedded inside a wooden birdhouse hanging from a thick oak branch near the driveway. Another high-definition camera was seamlessly hidden within a decorative, solar-powered path, light, bordering my property line. I strategically positioned additional lenses behind the intricate vinyl trim of my front porch and along the shadowed edges of my back wooden trellis. By 4 a.m., my entire property had been successfully transformed into an absolute digital fortress, with every single camera linked directly to an encrypted cloud storage application on my personal tablet. As I wiped the rainwater from my face and stepped back inside my dark hallway, a wave of cold, calculated confidence washed over me. I looked down at the glowing blue screen of my tablet, watching the high-definition live feed stream flawlessly across the monitor. Evelyn thought she had successfully blinded me and run me out of my own sanctuary. She had absolutely no clue that, for the first time, my entire property was watching her every move. The invisible trap had been set perfectly, and I didn't have to wait very long for Evelyn Vance to walk straight into it. Exactly 2 weeks into my quiet hidden camera operation, the system captured its very first definitive financial and legal goldmine. It was an exceptionally quiet Tuesday morning, around 3:15 a.m., when a sudden electronic alert vibrated softly against my nightstand, waking me from a light sleep. I reached over, unlocked my tablet, and pulled up the real-time cloud storage feed. My jaw instantly dropped as I watched the unfolding live video stream. There, illuminated perfectly under the advanced night vision lens, was Evelyn. She was dressed entirely in a dark, oversized hoodie and black leggings, completely shedding her usual elegant, high-society persona. She crept across her pristine lawn, looking around nervously before deliberately crossing the distinct concrete line onto my property. In her right hand, she carried a massive pair of industrial metal wire cutters. In her left, she held a large, unbranded plastic bottle filled with a strange, dark liquid. With a look of pure, smug satisfaction plastered across her face, Evelyn crouched down beside my exterior utility box. In one swift, aggressive motion, she used the heavy shears to completely sever my main fiber-optic internet cables, cutting my house off from the outside world. But she wasn't finished. She marched over to the newly planted garden beds near my porch, uncapped the plastic bottle, and began systematically pouring concentrated chemical weed killer directly onto my expensive new landscaping. She was deliberately poisoning the soil, ensuring nothing could ever grow there again. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark house, my heart pounding violently against my ribs as I watched the crystal-clear recording play out on the tablet screen. She spent nearly 10 minutes damaging my property before slipping back into her massive estate, entirely confident that she had pulled off the perfect, untraceable crime. But she had no idea that her petty nocturnal vandalism had just been recorded from 3 different angles in stunning, uncompressed 4K resolution. I leaned back against my pillows, a slow, calculated smile finally spreading across my face. It wasn't just a frustrating neighborhood dispute anymore. It was a definitive, pre-calculated crime captured in stunning 4K resolution, and I finally had the hard evidence I needed to completely destroy her. The hidden cameras had already captured a gold mine of property destruction, but Evelyn Vance was growing intensely impatient. Petty nighttime vandalism hadn't been enough to force me to pack up my bags and abandon Oak Ridge Lane, so she decided it was time to execute her ultimate master plan. She needed a major, catastrophic incident that would get me legally removed from the neighborhood permanently. On a remarkably bright and clear Saturday morning, her golden opportunity presented itself. I stepped out onto my front driveway, dressed casually, simply intending to collect the morning mail from my roadside box. Evelyn had been watching from her window, waiting for me to emerge. The moment my foot hit the concrete, her front door flew open. She marched directly over the property line, her face twisted into a mask of pure, calculated rage. She cornered me at the very edge of my driveway and began violently screaming a torrent of horrific insults, her voice deliberately projecting across the entire cul-de-sac. I stood completely still, keeping my hands dropped loosely at my sides, refusing to give her the angry reaction she was desperately probing for. I didn't shout back, and I didn't take a single step toward her. Seeing that her verbal abuse was failing to provoke me, Evelyn instantly shifted into a terrifying, pre-rehearsed performance. Suddenly, with absolutely zero physical contact from me, while I stood a full 3 feet away, Evelyn let out a theatrical, blood-curdling shriek. She aggressively gripped the collar of her own expensive, custom designer silk blouse, forcefully ripping the fabric down the center. Then, with a dramatic twist of her body, she violently threw herself sideways onto the hard, coarse asphalt of my driveway. The moment she struck the charcoal pavement, she began wailing hysterically, clutching her shoulder and clawing at the gravel. "Help! Someone help me! She's attacking me!" she screamed at the top of her lungs, creating an absolute public spectacle. From across the street, her loyal Lieutenant Marcus instantly emerged from his front door, running toward us while shouting that he was calling 911. Sirens echoed through the suburban street within minutes. Evelyn lay on the ground, crying tears of fake agony, entirely confident that this performance would put me behind bars. The high-pitched wailing echoing from my driveway had barely settled into a rhythmic, theatrical sob when the harsh mechanical growl of police cruisers filled the air. Evelyn's elaborate performance was flawless. She remained sprawled on the charcoal asphalt, her hand clutching the torn fabric of her custom silk blouse, her shoulders trembling with practiced precision. Within seconds, multiple law enforcement officers rushed onto my property, their faces grim and their hands moving instinctively toward their utility belts. They didn't see an innocent homeowner collecting the mail. They saw a chaotic, aggressive threat to a quiet neighborhood pariah. Marcus, stepping into his pre-rehearsed role like a seasoned actor, met the lead officer at the edge of the curb. "She just snapped, officer!" Marcus yelled frantically, waving his arms toward me in exaggerated horror. I watched it from my window. Chloe lunged forward without any warning, aggressively grabbed Evelyn's throat, and forcefully threw her down onto the hard pavement. We've been warning the city about her unstable psychological state for months. Armed with Evelyn's breathless, tearful statement and the clear, corroborating testimony of her most loyal friend, the patrol officers turned their focus toward me with rigid severity. They completely ignored my calm, level explanation, treating my absolute composure as the chilling indifference of a sociopath. I offered zero physical resistance, as the lead officer pulled my arms behind my back and securely locked the cold metal cuffs around my wrists. As they escorted me past the edge of my circular driveway, I looked toward the neighborhood sidewalk. A significant crowd of local residents had gathered along the edge of the street, crossing their arms and shaking their heads in total, self-righteous disgust at the crazy girl who had finally snapping under the pressure. Evelyn allowed herself to be helped up by a female officer, burying her face in her hands as if she were completely traumatized by the event. But as the patrol car door opened and I was carefully loaded into the hard plastic back seat, I caught a brief, uninterrupted glimpse through the tinted glass window. Evelyn slowly lowered her hands from her face, looking directly into my eyes, and blew me a subtle, mocking kiss. She thought the war was over. She didn't realize she had just walked directly into the gallows. The cold holding cell at the municipal police station was miserable, but I didn't shed a single tear or panic for a second. I was released on bail early the following morning, and my mind was entirely clear. Evelyn Vance genuinely believed her dramatic driveway performance had put the final nail in my coffin, but she was completely unaware that she had actually walked straight into a lethal legal trap. Instead of trying to plead my innocence to the local police department or confronting Evelyn directly, I immediately drove downtown to meet with Raymond Vance, a highly aggressive, top-tier civil litigator who specialized in high-stakes defamation and malicious prosecution cases. Raymond's office was vast and imposing, filled with dark mahogany wood and heavy legal volumes. I sat across from his massive desk, opened my laptop, and played the complete, unedited 4K security footage captured by my hidden property lenses. Raymond leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he watched Evelyn march onto my property, rip her own designer silk blouse, and violently throw her own body onto the hard asphalt while screaming for help. The room was completely quiet except for the audio recording of Evelyn's fake, hysterical wailing. Raymond watched the slow-motion playback 3 times, his professional composure completely fracturing into absolute astonishment. He realized that this was not a simple neighborhood dispute. It was an undeniable criminal conspiracy involving police manipulation, extensive property destruction, and a fraudulent assault claim. "Chloe," Raymond whispered, slowly removing his reading glasses and leaning back in his executive chair, a sharp, predatory smile spreading across his face. "This is a legal goldmine. They didn't just cross a line. They handed us a nuclear option on a silver platter. We aren't just going to easily beat this ridiculous criminal charge. We are going to launch an absolute counteroffensive that will strip that woman of her wealth, her reputation, and her freedom. We're going to take literally everything she owns." As I listened to his clinical strategy, the lingering residue of my anxiety completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, hardened focus. I knew that the local suburban system was rigged in Evelyn's favor, but the objective digital data on my hard drive didn't care about her money or her status. Raymond leaned back in his leather chair, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Chloe," he whispered, "we aren't just going to beat this charge. We're going to take everything she owns." Raymond Vance's aggressive counteroffensive was brilliant, but I knew that relying entirely on a slow, bureaucratic legal system could allow Evelyn to utilize her extensive local connections to quietly bury this case before it ever reached a jury. To ensure absolute accountability, I decided to take a highly unorthodox public step. Armed with my background as a professional graphic designer, I spent the entire weekend meticulously editing a comprehensive, chronological video piece. I titled it "The Nightmare Neighbor of Oak Ridge Lane Exposed." This was not a raw, unedited compilation of footage. It was a beautifully produced, high-retention narrative breakdown. I seamlessly compiled the crystal-clear 4K digital data my lenses had gathered over the past few weeks. The video opened with a crisp, undeniable midnight footage of Evelyn creeping onto my property line in her dark, oversized hoodie, aggressively snipping my fiber optic utility wires and systematically poisoning my landscaping with chemical weed killer. Then, transitioning perfectly into the main event, the video presented the slow-motion, multiple-angle footage of her dramatic, fully fabricated driveway assault performance. It exposed the absolute fraudulence of her claims with devastating clarity, completely juxtaposed against her public reputation as a sweet, high-society, suburban matriarch. To maximize viewer engagement and trigger the online recommendation algorithms, I embedded a highly specific, personalized mid-roll interaction prompt at the perfect high-suspense turning point. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. SFX. Rapid mouse click echoing, soft hum of a computer exporting video data. I took a deep, steady breath and officially hit the public release button on multiple major social platforms at exactly midnight on Sunday. I knew the video possessed all the elements of a viral sensation, but I was completely unprepared for the absolute speed of the impending digital wildfire. By exactly 6 a.m. the following morning, the video had entirely eclipsed 500,000 views, and the count was rising by tens of thousands of clicks every single minute. Suburban anonymity was no longer an option for her. Evelyn Vance had spent 6 long, grueling months trying to destroy my life and sanity in absolute secret. But it took the power of the internet less than 2 days to completely obliterate her existence in public. I leaned back in my desk chair, watching the viral firestorm burn, ready for the courtroom reckoning. The structural layout of my digital trap functioned exactly as engineered, and within 48 hours, the internet had completely weaponized my chronological evidence against Evelyn Vance. By Monday afternoon, the counteroffensive video had entirely shattered my conservative estimates, completely exploding across multiple mainstream media platforms to accumulate an unbelievable 4 million views. The cold, objective data left no room for interpretation or defensive spin. Local residents, internet sleuths, and outraged members of the surrounding Sacramento community immediately identified her pristine estate on Oak Ridge Lane, and the subsequent public backlash was instantaneous, relentless, and completely devastating to her social standing. The intense digital firestorm quickly breached the high society walls of the elite, upscale interior design firm, where Evelyn served as a highly visible senior partner. Outraged viewers flooded the corporation's professional switchboards with thousands of angry phone calls, completely paralyzed their customer service lines, and left a steady stream of thousands of negative, one-star reviews on every single one of their public business listings. Angry consumers demanded to know why a luxury design firm was employing a woman caught on crystal-clear night vision, committing industrial property destruction, and fabricating a violent physical assault to destroy a young woman's life. By exactly noon on Tuesday, the firm's executive board realized that protecting Evelyn's position would permanently liquidate their corporate reputation. They issued a blunt, public corporate statement on their website, formally severing all professional ties with Evelyn Vance and stripping her of her senior partnership effective immediately. Her massive, stable corporate income stream completely vanished in an afternoon. Meanwhile, her closest neighborhood allies began desperately running for cover. Marcus, her loyal lieutenant who had proudly provided the fraudulent testimony to the police, suddenly deleted all his personal social media accounts and refused to leave his house, deeply terrified that the viral firestorm would engulf his own career next. Evelyn had spent 6 long, grueling months carefully manipulating local authorities and building a unified neighborhood front to destroy my life in secret. But it took the unyielding power of public transparency less than 2 days to completely obliterate her entire career, her elite status, and her financial network in public. I sat quietly at my desk, watching her carefully constructed world burn to ash. The highly anticipated day of my formal criminal arraignment arrived with a heavy, suffocating tension. I walked into the pristine municipal courtroom dressed in a conservative, dark-tailored suit, flanked closely by my civil litigator Raymond Vance. On the opposing side of the room sat Evelyn Vance, looking pale, visibly exhausted, and deeply rattled by the unstoppable viral firestorm burning across the internet. Yet she and her high-priced defense attorney still desperately attempted to maintain their usual smug suburban composure. She wouldn't look me in the eye, keeping her hands tightly folded on the mahogany table as the state judge took his seat. Her lawyer smugly stood up, confidently presenting Evelyn's signed statement alongside Marcus's fraudulent eyewitness testimony, demanding that the court impose the maximum criminal penalty against me for the alleged physical assault. The baseline mood in the room shifted instantly, however, when Raymond Vance stood up to present our official defense. With a perfectly level, unwavering voice, Raymond formally introduced the unedited, 4K digital security footage captured by my hidden property lenses directly into the official court record. The assistant district attorney walked over to a portable presentation monitor on the side of the bench, pressing a single button to hit play. The entire courtroom went completely stone-cold silent as the crystal-clear night vision recording began. The prosecutor's face turned completely pale as he watched the star witness of his entire case walk directly onto my driveway, aggressively rip the collar of her own designer silk blouse down the center with her own hands, and violently throw her own body onto the hard asphalt while shrieking for help. The objective, multi-angle data completely demolished 6 long months of elaborate lies, fabricated calling the police complaints, and psychological gaslighting in less than 60 seconds. Evelyn's high-priced attorney slumped back into his leather chair, his jaw dropping in pure, unadulterated shock as he realized his star witness was a literal criminal fraud who had lied under oath. Evelyn buried her face into her trembling hands, her carefully constructed high society facade instantly shattering into thousands of pieces right before our eyes. The assistant district attorney watched the footage of Evelyn faking the assault on a portable monitor, his face turning completely pale as he realized his star witness was a criminal fraud. The unedited digital recordings had completely shattered the state's criminal case against me. But that courtroom victory was merely the first phase of our aggressive, calculated counteroffensive. Following my immediate, unconditional exoneration, the state judge formally shifted his gaze toward the prosecution bench, his voice echoing with absolute authority. He officially ordered the district attorney's office to launch an immediate, sweeping criminal investigation into Evelyn Vance for multiple severe offenses, including filing a completely false police report, committing criminal perjury under oath, and orchestrating malicious harassment against an innocent resident. But the legal destruction did not slow down there. Seizing our building momentum, Raymond Vance immediately initiated our pre-calculated civil counterstrike. We filed a massive, multi-tiered civil lawsuit against Evelyn, aggressively pursuing extensive financial compensation for intentional defamation, the malicious destruction of my personal property, and the severe infliction of intentional emotional distress. Face to face with an absolute mountain of bulletproof, triple-angle digital evidence, Evelyn's professional insurance provider released a cold corporate statement formally voiding her policy due to intentional fraudulent misconduct. She was left entirely on her own, personally liable for every single penny of our compounding legal claims. When the civil trial concluded, the presiding judge handed down a crushing, monumental $180,000 civil judgment entirely in my favor. Evelyn sat paralyzed at her defense table, her skin completely bloodless as the financial numbers were officially entered into the court record. The astronomical civil damages, combined with her rapidly exploding personal attorney fees and the sudden loss of her stable senior partnership income, triggered an immediate, catastrophic domino effect across her entire personal life. Less than 3 weeks after the final civil judgment was signed, a large yellow foreclosure sign was driven deep into the manicured front lawn of her pristine Willow Creek estate. Stripped of her elite career, completely shunned by the high society circles she had spent decades carefully curating, and utterly bankrupt, Evelyn was legally forced to liquidate her remaining personal assets and place her beloved luxury home up for an immediate, rushed public sale to settle her massive debts. Her complete and total downfall was absolute. Unable to absorb the astronomical financial penalties and losing her job, Evelyn was legally forced to place her beloved house up for sale. With the final, crushing court judgment officially entered into the municipal record, the suffocating dark cloud that had poisoned Oak Ridge Lane for 6 grueling months completely evaporated. The ultimate confirmation of my total victory arrived on a crisp, golden Saturday morning. I sat comfortably on my porch, wrapped in a cozy knit blanket, taking a slow, appreciative sip of hot black coffee. Down the street, the deep, rhythmic rumble of heavy diesel engines broke the quiet air as a massive, commercial yellow moving truck backed awkwardly into Evelyn Vance's circular driveway. From my elevated vantage point, I watched the ultimate suburban matriarch load her own cardboard boxes into the rear of the truck. Gone was the impeccably tailored cream blazer, the untouchable attitude, and the condescending smirk. She looked completely broken, dressed in worn sweatpants, her shoulders slumped in total, undeniable public humiliation. She refused to raise her head or make eye contact with a single person on our block. She had systematically spent half a year attempting to paint me as an unhinged lunatic to illegally evict me from my sanctuary. But her own arrogance had dug her financial grave. Unable to absorb the astronomical financial penalties and the sudden loss of her stable senior partnership income, she had been thoroughly ruined, forced to watch her pristine estate fall into immediate foreclosure. As the moving truck finally slammed its doors shut and drove away from the curb, a remarkable wave of public accountability swept through the cul-de-sac. The very neighbors who had spent months crossing the street to avoid me, whispering malicious rumors behind my back and loudly shouting me down at the homeowner association meetings, were now forced to confront the absolute truth. One by one, they slowly began walking up my front steps. The young mother from across the road arrived first, holding a warm plate of fresh chocolate chip cookies, her eyes downcast as she softly whispered a tearful apology for her cold behavior. Marcus, completely ostracized by the community for his criminal perjury, remained hidden away, while the rest of the neighborhood shifted back into the welcoming, friendly environment I had initially sacrificed my life savings to achieve. This terrifying suburban war taught me a profound, unforgettable lesson that I want every single person listening to my voice right now to carry with them forever. Arrogant, wealthy bullies will always try to use their loud voices, social status, and manufactured influence to back you into a dark corner, counting on you to break under the emotional pressure and run away. But you must never run. When you choose to stand your ground, refuse to fight by their volatile rules, and quietly gather objective, bulletproof digital data, the absolute truth will always triumph completely. Now, I am deeply curious about those of you who followed my journey until the very end. What would you have done if you were in my exact place? Comment below, and thank you for watching.